Hello there. Today I'm continuing my look at the wines from the late Sam Neill's Two Paddocks vineyard, and today I'm tasting their flagship wine. This is Two Paddocks Pinot Noir. It's a Central Otago Pinot Noir made as a blend from all their four sites, and this is the 2024 vintage of that. Now, since Sam Neill's passing a couple of weeks ago, there have been reports in the New Zealand press that Two Paddocks wines have been selling out in some of the major retailers. One of them, Liquorland, reported an increase in sales of 1,828%, seeing this wine, the Two Paddocks Pinot Noir, move from the 423rd spot to being their fifth best-selling wine. Looking at the information on winesearcher, this wine, Two Paddocks Pinot Noir, has overtaken wines such as Cloudy Bay Sauvignon Blanc, Kumeu River's Matty's Vineyard, and Felton Road Block 3 to become the most searched for New Zealand wine internationally. And there, it moved from a position of 9,042nd in the search rankings, where it was at the end of June, to being the 243rd most searched for product on that website. And this is all fitting, as Sam Neill was an avowed Pinot Noir lover. He had a real passion for the grape variety, which he claimed to have been introduced to by no less a person than the legendary English actor James Maison. Now, James Maison was a really important mentor for Sam Neill in his early days in acting, effectively helping to launch Sam Neill's international acting career in the late 70s. Evidently, Mason reached out to Sam Neill after having seen him in a small film called My Brilliant Career, and went on both to guide his career and to shape his acting style. Evidently, Sam Neill was working in Australia when, out of the blue, James Maison had called him. He praised his work, told him he'd arranged an audition for him for a part in the film Omen 3: The Final Conflict, and then even provided him with the airfare to London for the trip for the audition. Mason acted as a sponsor for the production and had personally suggested to the producers that they look at Neill for the part, and this was to be his first international studio role. And Mason invited Neill to stay with him and his wife in Switzerland en route to the UK to do this audition, and essentially took the young Sam Neill under his wing. Neill openly credited James Mason as his ultimate acting model, admiring the way he carried himself and his on-screen charisma. Now, James Mason was also a passionate wine connoisseur, and so it was that he introduced the 28-year-old Sam Neill to Burgundy during that 1979 visit to Switzerland. Over dinner at a restaurant called L'Auberge de Lande, which is near Lausanne, evidently Sam Neill asked James Mason what they were drinking, to be told, "It's Burgundy, my boy, and don't you forget it." And Sam took that advice to heart. Evidently, this single bottle of Gevrey Chambertin, of which we don't seem to know the grower's name, profoundly changed Sam Neill's life, sparking his enduring passion for Pinot Noir and eventually inspiring him to establish his own vineyard, Two Paddocks, in Central Otago in 1993. Evidently, after that dinner, Sam Neill began what he described as a 12-year exploration of the wines of Burgundy, both white and red. And during this, he fell completely in love with Pinot Noir as a grape variety. As I've said, this Pinot Noir is Two Paddocks' flagship wine. It's entirely from organically grown estate fruit and is a barrel selection from amongst the wines of Two Paddocks' 4 vineyards in the Central Otago region. Those being the first paddock in Gibbston, the Fusilier in Bannockburn, and the Last Chance and the Red Bank vineyards, both in the Alexandra Basin. And these are small sites, they're densely planted, and use a range of clonal material. Cropping is kept to under 5 tonnes, and as well as being organic, most of the vineyard practices are conducted by hand. Now, Mike Wang, who is Two Paddocks viticulturist, celebrated his 20th vintage with Two Paddocks in 2024, and he saw this as a vintage of 2 halves. The first half being characterised by the coldest spring that they'd had in this area for 5 years. To help fight the frosts, they'd used overhead sprays using aspersion, so they actually sprayed water onto the vines so that would freeze and protect the temperature of the vines encased in the ice from falling any further than 0 degrees. The downside of this was that when that melted, the water in the vineyards encouraged some quite aggressive weed growth. So with everything being done by hand, that was quite hard work. To cap this all off, there was hail in the Alexandra region in January, which they say affected some of the vineyards. And I've noticed only 2% of the blend for this wine actually came from the Red Bank vineyard in 2024. So I'm assuming that is the vineyard that was worst hit. So anyway, they described the early part of the growing season as having been challenging. February and March, on the other hand, saw warm, settled weather. Ripening progressed well, there were no autumnal frosts, so the fruit was picked clean and ripe and was able to reach optimum quality levels. Now, harvest started on the 26th of March at the Fuselier vineyard in Bannockburn and finished on the 17th of April at the first paddock in the Gibbston Valley. The blend for Two Paddocks Pinot Noir in 2024 comes 45% from the Fuselier vineyard in Bannockburn, 23% from the elevated cool climate setting of the Last Chance vineyard in Earnscleugh in Alexandra. As I say, only 2% of the blend came from the Red Bank Farm vineyard, which I believe normally provides most of the wine for this brand. And the remaining 30% of the blend came from the first paddock vineyard in Gibbston. Two Paddocks believe they are the only producer that actually makes a wine that combines fruit from all three of the principal sub-regions of Central Otago, i.e. the Cromwell Basin, Gibbston Valley and the Alexandra Basin. All the grapes were hand-picked. 54% of them were destemmed, so in other words 46% of them went into the fermenters as whole bunches, giving the ability for the stems to give the wine a bit of structure. Fermentation took place in small, round, open French oak fermenters and was allowed to start using the natural yeasts that had found their way into the winery on the fruit. There was a period of 5 to 7 days when the fruit was allowed to do a cold maceration, and the point of that is to allow the extraction of colour and perfumes in an environment where alcohol hasn't started to build up and will act as an extractant, so it's a much gentler extraction. Extraction was managed by pigeage, so hand plunging, and I have seen occasions when people have gone into the vats and used their feet to break up the cap of skins as well. And they're trying to manage this very delicately, so they're only employing pigeage once a day. Again here, the idea is that this is quite a gentle way of managing extraction. You're not mechanically pumping the grapes and therefore they're not being broken up. So you're not exposing the seeds and therefore you're not going to get quite as powerful or harsh a tannin being drawn out of those. Following fermentation, the different lots of wines macerated with the skins for a further 5 to 7 days, with the maceration being managed at every point to try and ensure that really it was only the finest, silkiest tannins that were being extracted from the fruit. The wine then aged for 10 to 11 months in French oak barrels, with 18% of those being new and the remaining 82% being between 1 and 4 years of age. The wine was bottled in April in 2025 and they produced somewhere in the region of 2,400 cases. So let's take a look at it, shall we? The wine has a lovely dark ruby colour. Having said that, it's not particularly deep. I can see through it fairly readily. It has 13% alcohol. I've got a nice big Pinot Noir glass here to be able to swirl it to release those aromas. I'm not particularly seeing any heavy tears being created there, so I'm not expecting this to be a huge wine. They are slowly just starting to form there, but they're not particularly obvious. So let's see what we make of the aromas. The aromas have a lovely depth and warmth. They're quite plush. There's almost a plum skin, sort of velvety nature to the aromas. Yet at the same time there is also quite a fresh red fruit, ranging from a sort of a raspberry through to a bright red cherry note, with some darker, more sort of black fruit, black cherry notes sitting behind. There are some very delicate hints of cedar and sweet spices sitting behind the fruit, but they're actually beautifully harmoniously combined with the fruit. They don't stand out particularly. So let's have a taste. The palate is mouth-filling and medium body. There's a very fine, maybe slightly velvety, dusty, powdery structure to the wine. And that's followed up by some very fresh acidity coming through. And while there are sort of fresh red fruits, an initial sort of raspberry and mulberry freshness, and some piquant red cherries to begin with, what actually opens out on the finish is much more of a black fruit note with blackberries and black cherries, but then slowly resolved to give a more sort of savoury note. All of a sudden you're left with notes of black fruit, sweet spice and truffle, and those are the flavours that are continuing on to the finish. Finish has a nice length, there's reasonable weight and warmth, despite the fact that this only has 13% alcohol. So that is the concentration of the fruit rather than necessarily the alcohol that is carrying it. This is a wine with some lovely elegance and good freshness. It has some fresh, attractive red fruit, both on the nose and on the attack on the palate. However, I do think it's a wine that is a little closed at the moment and will open probably to show a spectacular richness on its finish, given 2 to 3 years. Two Paddocks suggest that this is a wine that you could cellar out to 2037. I think certainly its fine, concentrated structure will allow that to happen, and the lively acidity should give it the stability to enable that fruit to open further as the tannins go on to resolve into a sort of a silky smoothness. This is currently a very harmonious wine that I believe has power and structure and should develop somewhere along the lines of something like a Pommard or a Nuit Saint-Georges, gaining a silky texture and more of those enchanting savoury notes of secondary development. I took a look at the winesearcher aggregated critic score for this wine. There, this vintage receives 93 out of 100. I think that's a very fair score. I think personally, I believe it has a potential to go further than that and might actually be worth 94 out of 100. I'm impressed not only by the wine's fruit, but also the elegance and balance of its structure. It's a wine that is designed to be very impressive after a little bit of time in the cellar. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, it would be fantastic if you could press the like button for me. I'd really appreciate that. If you would like to watch more of these videos, do please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. And if you sign up there, do set yourself an alert so you can be notified every time I publish a new tasting. If you have any comments or any questions, do please pop those in the comments box below. I would love to know what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. And if you have any friends you think might also like to watch, do please feel free to forward the video to them. I'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. Now, I will leave a link in the comments box below to the winesearcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can see where that, and also from that page where other vintages of this wine are available and at what price. As I say, it's become a very popular wine recently, but I was still able to order this online and there is availability out there. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me in watching this tasting. I do have another of the Two Paddocks wines to look at in my next tasting, so do please make sure you join me there. Hopefully we'll see you then. Bye for now.